Welcome back. We'll be making a flower granny square and removing the movie Invisible Man, a 2020 film starring Elizabeth Moss as Cecilia Cass, Oliver Jackson Cohen as Adrian Griffin, Aldous Hodge as James Lanier, and Storm Reed as Sydney Lanier. So this movie opens up to this really beautiful view of the ocean. The waves are crashing. It's like really dark and moody. And that's kind of like all you can hear is like this like ominous silence as it like kind of pans into this really big glass extravagant modern home. And we see Cecilia and Adrian, a couple, asleep in their bed. And it pans to Cecilia's face, and she opens her eyes and she looks at the clock, and it's like 3:41 in the morning. So she like very carefully pulls back the bed sheets, and Adrian's hand is like on her stomach. She like very carefully pulls it away, slips out of the bedroom, and then sort of sneaks around the entire house, collecting things that she's like stashed away in vents. Makes her way out of the house, and as she's leaving the garage, which has like all these like motorcycles and like really fancy car, this huge home that's super isolated and secluded, this Doberman comes up, and she feels really bad for this dog, and so she takes the shock collar off of him, and unfortunately he accidentally bumps into the car, sounding the alarm. So she's really wigged out, Cecilia, and so she runs into this like giant cement like fencing, and she gets over it, climbs out, makes her way through the woods and onto the road, and then nobody's there. She's like really, her heart's just going like a million miles an hour. She's really stressed out, and then she sees the headlights, and we find out that it's her sister in the car who was called there, and she's like kind of like weirded out. She's like, what's going on, and Cecile's like, it's okay, let's just go. And so her sister wants a little more clarity, Emily, and she's asking what's going on, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, from the darkness, Adrian comes and slams into the car and starts like saying, you can't leave me, you can't do this, Cecilia. And he actually smashes the glass window with his bare knuckles, breaks it, and starts grabbing onto her clothing. And her sister's like, at this point, like, okay, we gotta go. Slams on the car, and they lose him. So as she was getting into the car originally, though, she dropped a bottle of pills. It says like diazepam or something. I assume it's like a sleep aid. And he finds those on the ground. He picks it up. So that's where we left off in the middle of the night. So we pan over to like a couple months or a couple weeks later, and she is in the house. Cecilia's in the house, and she's looking out the window, and she's living with the cop that had helped her, James, and his daughter, Sydney Lanier. And so she's really weirded out about going outside. She's scared to make any sudden moves. And she gets brave enough to go out to go check the mail one day, and she sees this guy jogging in like a dark hoodie. And she gets really weirded out, runs back in the house all scared, and James pretty much just tells her to keep working on it. And so then that same day, her sister, Emily, shows up at the door with some news for Cecilia. And Cecilia is like really upset that she's there. She's like, you shouldn't have come here. He knows where you live. You can't be here. He's gonna follow you. Cecilia's really weirded out about Adrian and how abusive he is. And so Emily's big news is that actually Adrian had taken his own life, and that he was no longer going to be a threat to her. The tension in the room kind of eases off, and so Emily asks like Cecilia what had really happened, what's going on with all this. And so Cecilia kind of slowly tells a little bit about how controlling Adrian was and how he would hurt her, how she wasn't allowed to leave. She was practically a prisoner at that beautiful fortress. I mean, it was beautiful, but any prison's a bad prison. And that she did everything she could to escape, and she was so glad that it was over. So the whole tension and everything that this whole movie gives off kind of eases up just right here. And she starts to feel a little more relaxed. She's able to actually go outside and kind of do a little bit of things, but not anything on 2 level. Then we get to learn who Sydney is, who is James the cop's daughter. And she's fun and kind of out there, and she wants to go to a really fancy fashion school. She's like a teenager. And as they're kind of interacting and having this nice moment, James says that Cecilia got mail, and Cecilia's kind of weirded out. She doesn't think anybody even knows she lives there. That's why she's staying with the cop. She didn't want to stay with her sister because so Adrian knows where her sister lives. So she's kind of weirded out why she's getting mail. It turns out it's from a law office by Tom, Adrian's brother. And so Cecilia ends up going to this law office to meet with Tom with her sister Emily. And Tom pretty much tells Cecilia that she will be awarded $5 million in increments. And as long as she doesn't sustain any criminal charges during any of the transactions. And he was like starting to like read off this like sort of passive aggressive like suicide like end letter that Adrian left for Cecilia to read. And Emily, her sister, kind of like shuts that down and says that Cecilia does not need to listen to this. And so we kind of go from there. And so Cecilia goes back home to James and Sydney, and she's like, oh, I have like a super big surprise for you guys. Like, close your eyes. And they come into the living room with the big ladder there. And they're all kind of like, oh, thanks. That's super nice. And so she's like, yeah, like, you totally need this. But there's something up at the top of the ladder, Sydney. You should go get it. And so Sydney goes up there and grabs it, opens the letter up, and finds out that Cecilia is going to be putting $10,000 into a bank account for Sydney so that she can attend school. And this is like a huge thing. The whole family's so happy, and they celebrate with champagne. And we kind of like get this like happy pillow fight, like a normal kind of like happy moment. And then it pans out to the hallway where like we get the impression someone's watching all this with like a brooding mood. I don't know. The camera in this movie just, oh my gosh, it's so good. But anyway, so we kind of get this like feeling of unease in the middle of this like really happy moment. So the next morning, James and Cecilia are kind of a little bit hungover from champagne, and Cecilia is making breakfast. James says he has to go to work and he doesn't want any breakfast, but can she please go wake up Sydney? And so Cecilia says sure, and she's got a skillet over the gas stove and it's on like low, cooking eggs and bacon. And so she walks over to go wake up Sydney real quick, and everything should be fine. The bacon's still pretty raw in the skillet. And so as she's gone out of frame, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the stove turns on high. And it starts getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and eventually there's a fire. And so Sydney and Celia run back in there, and Sydney gets the fire extinguisher out and puts the flame out. And so they're both kind of like, whew, that was weird. You can't believe I did that. And so that was a little strange. Cecilia's kind of like, that's strange. And so they go back to their normal lives after that. And so Cecilia went shopping a little bit because she had told everyone that Adrian controlled everything she wore. So she has some money now. She feels a little liberated. She picks like a dress and stuff like that she's taking out of these shopping bags and admiring her in her room. And it's kind of like a quiet moment. But then all of a sudden there's like this weird clicking noise, like a pen clicking or something. And she turns around and she doesn't see anything. And she's just like really weirded out. And so she's like, James, is anyone there? And so she goes, through the house, and she starts hearing these weird little noises through the house. And then it gets really, really quiet. And it's dark. She doesn't want to wake anyone up, but she's also weirded out by this noise. And then all of a sudden we hear like the turn of a doorknob and the opening of the front door. And so she's really weirded out right now, but she goes through the front door, stands on the porch and looks around. It's dark and it's really cold. You can see her breath. And as she's breathing, there's this like quiet moment and there's a space behind her. And then all of a sudden, the breath of like something invisible shows up. She doesn't see this. We see this though. And so we're creeped out. It gives you tingles the first time you see it. This movie's so done so well. And she goes back inside and she goes back to go sleep with Sydney in Sydney's large bed because she's just feeling, weirded out by that. And it's quiet again. Everyone's sleeping. The blankets and the comforter that's covering both girls is pulled off the bed entirely. And then there's these like flashes, like someone's taking photographs. And so from the blanket missing and the flashes, Sydney kind of like wakes up, but she doesn't like register that flashes were happening or anything. She's not totally awake. She opens her eyes and then she looks at the end of the bed and there's this like mannequin there. And she's just like, oh my God, like totally startled and just weirded out. And so she's like, okay, it's fine, it's fine. And so she gets up and goes to pick up the sheets off the floor and she starts hearing the clicking again. And it's dark and Sydney's still sleeping. And so she sees the little red chair that's in Sydney's room and she walks over and she's like, I don't know, just like really wigged out. She feels like somebody's there or something. So she throws the sheet over the chair and nothing's there. And so she's like, oh, okay, it's just, kind of imagination. And she starts pulling the sheets back to bed to go back to sleep. But then the sheets won't pull. And they won't pull. And she like turns around and looks and there's like these invisible feet standing on the sheet, keeping it still. And she's like, oh, you just shocked. She doesn't do anything. She's frozen and the feet take a step towards her. And that's when she's just like, she screams for James to come help, really wigged out. The whole family's wigged out. And James is like, what's going on? She's like, something's here. There was invisible feet. Like, I don't know how to explain it. And so James is like pretty much chalking up that she's still got PTSD from, living with an abuser for so long and it's haunting her. And so he pretty much just tells her, Adrian will haunt you for as long as you let him. Don't let him haunt you. And plus you have this super important interview tomorrow. You probably just got nerves. You just need to go relax. And so she takes his advice. She goes back to sleep. It's all fine. The next scene we get is her going in for this interview. And she's doing really, really well. She's hitting it off pretty good. And so the interviewer asks to see her portfolio, to see some of her work. And so she's like, yeah, sure. And she pulls out the portfolio, opens it up, and it's totally blank. Nothing inside. And she's just like, what? Like totally shocked. And all of a sudden, like everything kind of like goes quiet except for like kind of a white noise. And she's like feeling faint. And so she gets up and the world around her kind of starts like tilting and she's feeling, kind of like sick. And just before she passes out, we hear Adrian's voice going, Cecilia, are you okay? And then she faints. And so she wakes up at the doctor's office. They're giving her some blood tests. She's awaiting the results with James, and they pretty much tell her that they're going to have to look over them overnight. They'll give a call. And so she goes home, tries to relax, and the doctor calls her and says that the reason that she fainted was because she had a large dose of diazepam in her blood. And, Cecilia's like, what? Like, that's the thing that she had given Adrian to make him go to sleep, and she forgot the bottle. Just as she's on the phone with the doctor, though, she sees the bottle sitting on the counter. It's all bloody with bloody fingerprints. And she just like drops the phone away as the doctor's pretty much saying, and there's something else I want to talk to you about. So we don't find out what the doctor wanted us to talk to her about. And so at this point, she's done, with the whole invisible feet, with the feet on the sheet, the sabotaging of the interview. And the diazepam showing up all bloody on her counter. She goes back with James to confront Tom, who is Adrian's brother, the lawyer. And she says that he knows he's alive. What's going on? Tell him to leave me alone. I'm done. And Tom's like, well, my brother is so terrible and he got to me too. You just got to learn to just, get over it. It'll be fine. And, pretty much like kind of brushes her off a bit. And then to like prove a point or whatever, he shows her, he has this like file all handy, which is kind of weird. Like he prepared for it, but he has like pulls from this file, these ending scenes of Adrian at the final stage on the floor. And so Cecilia's like, okay, well, there's that. And James is convinced. And so at this point, Cecilia is just weirded out. James is kind of thinking she's a little loopy. And so she goes back to her sister's apartment or her office, and it isn't clear like where exactly her sister is. But anyway, she goes to go see her sister, and her sister opens the door and pretty much says, wow, look who showed up. I can't believe that you would show your face after what you said. And it's good to know what you really think about me. And Cecilia's like, what are you talking about? And her sister Emily's like, well, the email that you sent me, that horrible email that, what you really think about me. And I never wanted that money that Adrian was going to give you. And it's just so rude that you would even think that I would want that. And so Cecilia tells her, like, no, I never wrote any email. That was Adrian. I never did that. And so Emily's like really confused at this point. She's like, Adrian is dead, and you need some medication because you sound crazy. And pretty much just cuts Cecilia off. So Cecilia goes home and cries. She just feels really lost, and she's being pretty much tormented and harassed by Adrian, even though everybody is telling her, no, it can't be Adrian. And her sister doesn't want to talk to her anymore. And she finds the email that supposedly she had sent to her sister, and it pretty much just says that, she wished that she was out of her life instead of Adrian, and that she never wants to see her again. Just all these horrible things a person could say to somebody. And so she's just crying and just feeling really awful. And so Sydney comes in the room, and Sydney, says, tries to cheer her up a little bit and gives her a hug and just says, maybe we can just like have a girls' night or whatever. And it just seems like kind of like a nice moment. That out of nowhere, Sydney is slapped, just like really hard hit to her face. And it's so shocking. And she like starts screaming for her dad to come in the room. James comes in the room. He's like, whoa, 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 what happened? And Sydney's like, Cecilia hit me. And Cecilia's like, I didn't hit you, I swear to God. And so of course James and Sydney don't believe her, because like that was really crazy. And so James grabs Sydney and says he's going to take her somewhere, and tells Cecilia that she needs to not be in his house when he gets back. Cecilia is essentially then left alone in the house with Adrian somewhere in it. So Cecilia cries for a second, just kind of like, and goes into the kitchen. She's kind of like looking around. It's really ominous. This place is really big. She doesn't know where Adrian is or how he's doing this. So she grabs like a big kitchen utensil and kind of like walks around with it. She's not really sure what to do. And she eventually goes back into her bedroom and sits down and kind of like talks to Adrian. She doesn't know where she is, but she's just pretty much saying like, you're so rich and successful. Like, you could have any girl you want. Like, why would you want me? Like, are you doing this to me? Why can't you just forget about me? And so she sees her phone and she decides to call him just to kind of, I don't know what she calls him. And the phone rings in the attic. She's like freaked. And so she goes up into the attic. It's really dark and dusty, and she calls the phone again, and she sees it, and she grabs it, and then there's through the pictures, there's all these pictures of her and Sydney, in their pajamas, laying down in bed sleeping, and just tons of them, and it's really weird. And then all of a sudden, from an unknown number, that phone gets a text message that says, surprise. And so this point, she's really freaked out. And so she grabs whatever she can grab first. She grabs this can of paint and goes to the opening of the hatch to the attic ladder and throws the paint down the hatch, and it lands on a person that wasn't there, making them visible in this all white thing. She screams, backs up, and then the person runs away. And so she goes down and she's following these white paint footsteps into the kitchen where the sink is running, and looking around for him, kind of calling him out. And then all of a sudden he grabs her and starts holding her over her head and hurting her, and she gets away. She hits him, and they have this big battle. She can't see where he is. He's just hurting her, and it gets to the point where she finally finds some plates and smacks a couple against his head, I would assume. You can't really see him during this whole thing. And she gets out and she runs into the street into night, way away. And that whole fight scene was super long and really cool to watch, just because I don't even know how they did it. But she was wearing straight up shirt, a regular t-shirt, and yoga pants, and she somehow ends up with her phone on the road. I mean, this must have been some of those yoga pants that have pockets that are super reinforced. All I'm saying, I want some of those, because that whole fight scene, that was crazy. Her phone survived through all that. So anyway, she calls a Uber or whatever and gets a ride, and calls an Uber or whatever, gets a ride, and goes to Adrian's house where he was. And so she's all alone in the house. She sees the dog, Zeus, again, and she gives him pets. And then she kind of wanders around the house, and the house is all covered in sheets and stuff like that. When someone's no longer at home, they cover sheets so nothing gets dust or whatever. And so it's kind of quiet and everything. And so she finds this room where he was working, and there's this tablet on the wall with a camera pointing in a weird direction. And so she puts her hands up to this thing in the middle, and she sees her hand getting closer to it, and she finally touches it, and it appears all the little cameras sync off. And you can see this perfect suit made of cameras reflecting everything around it. So she finds out how he's been doing all this. So she grabs the suit and then stashes it in the vent in the closet where she had stashed everything else when she was trying to leave Adrian, where her bag was and stuff. So she stashes it in the same spot. Just as she's doing that, though, she starts hearing footsteps of someone else in the house. So she hides behind the door. The door opens, and it's super tense, and we see these footprints depression on the carpet, and she smacks, it's not really smacks, but she pushes away from him, try to get away, and he pushes her way far across the floor out of the closet. She's scared. She can't see him. He's menacing and mad or whatever. And the dog comes out of nowhere, Zeus, who's seriously the hero of the whole show, and barks at him, protecting Cecilia. And so she gets enough time to run away. She runs back to the Uber. I'm going to call it Uber because I don't know what it is. Taxi, whatever you want. Uber. And gets a ride. And as she's on the ride, she calls her sister and says, "We have to meet. I don't care what you think's going on. Please, we have to meet." And so it pans to this really nice restaurant. It's an atmosphere. It's her sister who's tense about this whole thing. I mean, she looks relaxed, but you could tell that the relationship's tense. And Cecilia, who's got noticeable bags under her eyes. She looks stressed, pale, she looks like she's been through it, and she totally has. And so her sister's kind of assessing her condition like this, and I think that that's what kind of opens her up to listening. They get interrupted by a waiter a couple times, it's not a big deal. But anyway, so Cecilia says that, nothing is what it seems. She can prove what's been happening. She can prove that Adrian's messing with her. And Emily kind of leans in, and she's listening to this, really animate about what is it that you think you have on Adrian to prove this. And then all of a sudden her eyes advert to the left and then focus, like she just can't believe what's there. And so Cecilia like stops with what she's saying, turns and looks, and then there's a weapon floating in the air, and then all of a sudden her sister is, you know, she got killed, and the knife is then all of a sudden shoved in Cecilia's hand. Like a lady from the table over screams. Cecilia freaks and screams too. And then we have Cecilia being taken away, taken to a psych ward. She's like tied down. She's telling people like, no, don't, like, he's going to get me. He got my sister. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. And how dare he do that? You know, she was pretty much yelling at Adrian that he's just the most awful, vile person. And she's being tied down as she got tranked, and they pretty much leave the room after that. And she's just kind of like just starting to like nod off, you know, from the heavy, whatever they gave her, sedative. And all of a sudden she hears Adrian's voice saying, surprise. And so, yeah, it's pretty rough. And then the next scene we have is the cop and James, and they're kind of interviewing her and asking her about like what happened. And then, oh, didn't you send your sister this terrible email? Oh, didn't you do, you know, things that are pretty much incriminating to her. She's just like raw at this point. I mean, she lost her sister. Everyone is against her. She has nobody in the world. Adrian is getting away with completely everything. And she tells James that she has a way to prove that Adrian is doing all this, but she can't tell him right here because Adrian's actually in the room with them. And they're like, nobody's in the room with us, you know. And so James just pretty much tells the other cop to kind of just let him deal with it. He leaves for a second, and James is still in there. And so he tells Cecilia, you know, it'll be okay. You know, just take it, you know, just try to relax or whatever. And so she goes back to her room, and she's in there with like a nurse. And the nurse is telling her that she is pregnant, and does she have any family or friends that she can tell, because they're not going to let a person in a psych ward keep a baby. And so Cecilia's like shocked, you know, she's been on secret birth control so she wouldn't get pregnant. And the nurse like tells her that that she's been pregnant within the last month, which I hate to like pick at that too much because it is a really good movie, but there's no way from a single blood test that you could tell that. At least I don't think so. I think they would have to measure you and, you know, find out all that stuff. I don't know. It just seems like pretty on the spot to say, oh yeah, within the month of this month, you know, you made something. And we only know this from one blood test. I don't know. It seems a little far out there for me. But anyway, and so we find out it's been within a month, and she's been away from Adrian for longer than that. So Adrian's pretty messed up. He somehow managed it. And so, or actually, it doesn't really say how long she's really been away from him, but all things considered, it's creepy either way. So she is next taken to a meeting room and meets with Tom, who's Adrian's brother. And he pretty much tells her that the money that she was getting is totally cut off now because she is charged with criminal charges. And that was one of the stipulations to the agreement for her to have money. And kind of like snarkily rubs it in her face that, oh, there's going to be no money for Sydney's college now. And, you know, it's all... You know, he's just so smarmy about it and says that she can't even fight if she wanted to. And then he kind of like leans in and says that everything will be dropped and she can go back to normal if she returns to Adrian and agrees to have the baby. And that Adrian knew she was secretly using birth control and that they had replaced it with something else. And that Adrian's, you know, he's all done punishing her now. You know, it's just time to quit playing games and return to him. Like she's been the problem the whole time. And so she's just like, she gets really mad and she like knocks all his little papers off the table. And as he's collecting the papers, she steals a pen from his briefcase. And so he leaves and tells her to like think about it, or whatever. So she's back in her room, and her room has like a shower and a toilet and a bed. And the nurse is checking everything, making sure she doesn't have anything in her mouth or whatever, and says goodnight. And so closes the door, locks her in. And Cecilia goes over to the shower and grabs the pen from a secret hiding place and pretty much holds her wrist up with the pen in grip and says, you know, like, you'll never get me and you'll never get the baby, and starts hurting herself. All of a sudden, something invisible grabs her to stop her, and she's like, oh, there you are, you know, and gets him, hurts him, and a guard barges in, and it's like, whoa, what's going on here, you know? And since Adrian's suit got damaged a little bit, it's like malfunctioning. You can see a bit of it. And so he's like, whoa, what? You know, and so Adrian begins attacking the guard, hurting him, and Cecilia rushes out of the door, and as she's running down the hallway, she smacks right into a couple guards who are then dragging her back. Adrian then attacks both of the guards, and then as Adrian and Cecilia are like facing off, more guards come, and Adrian hurts those guards, and then more guards come, he hurts those guards, and then more guards come. I mean, it's a really brutal sequence of scene. It's pretty cool how they did it, but my gosh, it is super brutal. Anyway, he gets pretty hurt from all that, and he runs off into the hallway and down the stairs and out into the parking lot where it's just pouring rain. Cecilia follows. She now has a weapon from one of the guards, and she's out for it. She's out to get him. And so she's looking around in this really tense scene of all these cars in this parking lot. It's raining really hard. She's looking for Adrian. She sees flashes of him here and there, and there's more guards that are arriving looking for her. They don't know about Adrian yet. And so there's a point where she goes under this like car hatch, and she thinks she sees him, and he like grabs her by the neck and pushes her against another car and just says, I'll never hurt you for trying to get back at me, but I will hurt those you love, and it's a shame that that little girl Sydney has to go. And so then he just like disappears. And so Cecilia's like wigged out. She steals a car and she calls James, which props to her for remembering a number by heart these days. And he's like, whoa, what are you doing out of the psych ward? And she's like, doesn't matter. Like, says Sydney's in danger. We gotta get back there. So they get there, and Adrian starts attacking Sydney, starts attacking James and Cecilia. They have this huge brawl out thing, and you could tell Adrian's not as like strong as he was, you know, like he's definitely taken some blows pretty hard, even though he has put up a really good fight. And you know, thankfully Sydney's okay, and he ends up getting James knocked out, and then Cecilia, with the weapon she had, takes him out. And so she rips off his mask to kind of see see Adrian's face one more time. And it's not Adrian. It's Tom. And oh my gosh, that was such a twist. And so we're then panned to James talking to Cecilia, saying, you know, it was Tom the whole time. They sent covert ops into, or whatever they said, tactical gear into Adrian's home, and they found Adrian in some like hidden room, tied up and all beaten up and looking rough, fresh wounds. And you know, it wasn't him, it was his brother Tom, and Tom's so evil. And you know, if you just like admit to all that, then we'll just say that Tom hurt your sister and everything, and we'll have everything dropped, and you should be good. So, you know, she does for the time, and just to, you know, get some freedom. So then we have a point where it's the middle of the night, you know, she's looking at Sydney, and, you know, it's kind of like she's become kind of like a motherly figure to this really smart young lady. And so she gets up in the middle of the night and makes a phone call, and she makes it to Adrian, and Adrian's like, oh, I'm so glad you called, you know. And then like, I don't know, just this like wintry voice, I don't know, like he's so happy, and it's just icky. And so the next scene we have is her looking super fierce. She's got her hair all done. She's wearing all black. She's got the red lipsticks and super nice heels. And she's walking up to meet Adrian for their, I don't know, date or something. And at his house. And so he's like, oh, you look so beautiful. Like, you always look beautiful. And she's just kind of like done with it. She's like, uh-huh. And so they go in. He's got all this food for her because she's not sure what she's craving. They sit down to eat. And he's like, oh, I just, I can never be vulnerable with anybody but you. You're the only one that gets to see my other side. And I don't know, just like being vulnerable to her, but in a weird way. And so she's like, well, if you want to be a part of this baby's life, you have to admit that you did all that stuff and not your brother Tom. And so then we pan over to James sitting in a older cop vehicle listening in. So obviously Cecilia's then bugged. They're recording this. And we also are introduced to the fact that there's a camera in the dining room capturing everything happening. So from that point, Cecilia's like, stop lying, quit lying to me. Tell me what you did it. Just admit you did it. And so Adrian holds up his argument. He's like, no, it was my brother Tom. I would never do anything like that to you. Like, no, it's not me. And so he comes up, she just starts crying because she's just like, she's so fed up that he won't even be truthful for her in, quote unquote private. And he comes over while she's crying and he puts his like hand on her leg, like really possessively, and looks her in the eye and says, I would never do anything like that to you. Don't worry. Yeah, Adrian says, it's going to be okay. He knows her better than anyone in the whole world, and that shouldn't come as a surprise. She's pretty much done at this point. She says, I have to go to the bathroom. He's like, okay. And so Adrian goes to sit back down, and he gets this, like, look on his face. It goes back to her, and she's just kind of cleaning up herself, and she kind of stops, and then it goes back to Adrian. And he gets this like weird dead look on his face, like he's super zoned out, but like confident and secure, like he's really happy with himself. Then out of nowhere, like whew, this knife appears and gets him right across the neck, just like her sister had done. And it's all caught on camera. There's nobody being caught on their camera but him. He collapses to the ground, holding on to his neck. And all of a sudden, Cecilia comes back into the room. She screams, she calls for help for the cops, 911. And she then exits the call and gets out of the video frame and sits down, looks at him for a minute and says, surprise, and watches him pretty much go. James, the cop who has been listening to all this, runs in and sees her walking out with a duffel bag of her things, I assume, and the dog Zeus, and pretty much says that Adrian got rid of himself. And James pretty much just like gets this look on his face like, yeah, it seems like he got himself. So that's the end of our movie, and the end is really just her walking away. It's free, the look of like relief on her face, confidence. This one was a little weird of a movie, but it was done so well. I mean, just the camera work, the way they did everything, it really makes you feel like you're there. And the silence of this movie, like, silence is so loud when it's done correctly, and this movie did it correctly. And the creepy little noises that would click in. I watched this movie about 3 times now. First as it is, second with subtitles, and then just another time just for whatever. And the twists in this movie are done really well. Even someone that's watched lots of movies can, it's definitely took me by surprise a couple times, and the action shots in this are really good. I think a lot of the things about Adrian, even though she didn't really go into like big detail about what he did to her, because she just kind of says like, oh, he like hurt me and wouldn't let me leave and all this stuff, and didn't really like go on and on. Not that she needs to, but you know, it's nice to know like how devious is this guy from right off the bat. And we kind of see that with him, you know, taking out her sister and getting her pregnant without her consent pretty much, and isolating her. And at the very end, she kind of gets her ultimatum revenge, no way out, you know, freedom card by doing something to get hit back at him the exact same way as he got her sister. And, you know, I'm good with this ending. I think it ended pretty good. It ended really strong. The whole movie was really strong, and it ended super strong. And to be honest, I was like super happy that the dog made it out too. Because when he confronted, you know, at the closet scene where she comes out and he pushes her, you know, and they're about to face off, the dog rushes in to bark at him, and she runs away. And then we don't hear like a yip or anything else like that. I just assumed at that point that the dog was expired, and felt kind of sad because it had been a sweet dog. And then at the end, to have the dog walk out with her duffel bag and her sleek black clothes and looking pretty fierce, it was like a good ending for me. I was like, okay, all bases covered. So let me know if you like this video, if you like this movie, if you've seen this movie, what do you think about it? Is there any plot holes or something that maybe you caught that I didn't? Let me know in the comments. If there's any movies that you would like me to review and crochet to, I'd love suggestions. I like suspenseful movies. I like romantic movies. I like sci-fi. I like thrillers. I like it all. I like horror movies too. Not like super gory ones though. So let me know what you think, and if you could like and subscribe, that would really help my channel grow, and comments help me keep myself in check. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Goodbye.